This episode of the Unredacted Podcast is brought to you by Dragon Forge Consulting. Dragon Forge provides boutique consulting services for federal and commercial clients looking to expand their business in a turbulent time. Learn more by visiting their website at www.dragon-forge.net. That's www.dragon-forge.net. Us just get going.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of podcasters are like that, and I should know by now, but I've learned there's been a couple of times I've started a call with somebody, and I knew we were recording a podcast, but like you start chatting, and they're like, okay, and then they start, and you don't realize when they started asking the questions, like the actual list of questions. So that's always tough. No,
That's
you've never
sneaky.
been? I feel like that's your whole MO, Brian, so don't even. It's a little sneaky when other people do it, but if I do it, it's just building a friendly rapport as we get in. I mean, I get the media angle of not wanting to waste, because sometimes somebody says something good and you weren't recording, and you're like, oh man, I wish I'd recorded that. But
exactly, and the thing too is, and I actually picked this up from another podcaster, Mark Maron, who does the same thing. It's like the tape is running before they walk into the room. Now, I can't quite do that all the time, but it does, I think, set a different tone for our guests rather than just like, hey, now it's time. And it is a little different over electronic medium because there is some sort of countdown or they know or something like that. But I don't know. Hey, I heard you just got back from the sunny state of California.
oh yeah, Connect West. I've already forgotten because I was in Denver this week, but I was like, yep, I was in California last. It was delightful. I loved it. Connect West was fantastic. San Diego did not disappoint with the weather. We went last year and it rained. It was awful, so I had to have a do-over. I brought all my kids with me. We did Legoland, we did Disneyland, we did work. Got to hang out with Bob Sharp and Ellen McCarthy. Always a win.
Yeah, that's
amazing. Panels, content. Yeah, it was good. We missed you, obviously, but I was glad you were able to spend spring break with your family. Maybe next year.
Yeah, and we went to the glorious Outer Banks for the spring break, Passover, Easter period. And we went with my daughter's theater group.
Oh,
some
wow.
of her friends. So it was a sizable group of kids. I don't know if you know this, but teenagers like to stay up really late.
Yes.
Like 2 or 3 in the morning. And, that's not a quiet time for them. It's a very loud time for them. For this daddy, that's usually a quiet time for daddy. But it was still very enjoyable. And, yeah, the weather was gorgeous. Water was too cold, but it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That how long has Clearance Jobs been doing that event out in San Diego?
So last year, 2025 was our first year. We've been doing Connect events now for 6 years, but we've done it in DC for 4 years and decided, hey, San Diego sounds nice, right? The whole notion of hey, the cleared workforce exists in other places. I have to talk once an episode about how I live in Omaha, Nebraska, just to remind people that the cleared workforce has geographic, diversity here. And so it was just a good way to get out into our community and kind of get the local. Now, I will say we're struggling to pick up the San Diego demographic. So if you live in San Diego and you're an unredacted podcast listener, please reach out, because most of our attendees are people who flew from DC, which, who doesn't hate a nice trip from DC to San Diego? But I would like to continue to build it out because we have 4 events a year now. We also go to San Antonio. We also go to Colorado Springs. I feel like I've tapped into a little bit more the San Antonio demographic, the Colorado Springs one. But, we have a few anchors, a few solid people that live and work in San Diego and come to the event. And that's really cool because, every city has its own vibe and flavor, We had Hawaiian secret squirrel shirts. So, yeah, it was great.
Ooh. I love them socks you guys do. Those are awesome.
Yeah.
I gave a pair to my daughter. She wears them all the time because she loves the little squirrel on them.
Yeah.
They are super cute. So, Lindy, I have a semi-personal question. When somebody sits down with you and tells you a secret, or it's like a really special conversation that's very closely held, how do you think about that exchange?
It's these questions sometimes, Brian. Like, I feel like I know what we're talking about, and then you ask me a question. I mean, well, there's the two sides of it, right? I mean, I literally wrote a book called Trust Me, right? There's the vocational side of, like, obviously, if someone tells you something that you're not supposed to disclose, you know what to do with that. Now, I feel like I also feel that personally, right? That I feel like as a person, I want to be a trusted person, even if it's not vocationally required. But there is also a big part of me that I don't like to carry other people's secrets that I'm not authorized to carry. Maybe it's that IC background, but anytime people talk about secrets, and maybe as a parent too, right? You learned this, like child protective measures, like, oh, we don't do secrets. What are secrets? We don't, I always have my mom hat on, right? So actually, secrets mean something very specific. So if somebody sits down and tells me something, I often start with, there's no secrets here. There's only like, is this a surprise? Is this something you don't want to? Is this trusted information and you're trusting me with it? Now that was my unqualified answer. Now what in the heck were you asking? Why were you asking, Brian? And what is your answer to that question too?
I'll give you my answer, but the reason I'm asking is because we had a very cool interview this past week. We got to interview Jim Danoy, who was the president's daily briefer for President Obama. And one of the things that's very interesting about that relationship between a presidential daily briefer and the president is that the conversation, just like you're saying, is built on a lot of trust, because the president probably will not ask about your opinion about a policy, but you'll definitely understand why he's asking a question. And there is this weird interchange that Jim gets into about what is it that I can share as feedback to the people that are providing me the intelligence that I'm providing to the president. How much of that is policy sensitive? How much of that is a secret, but obviously in this kind of chamber of silence about what's being told to the president, when it's being told to the president, what the president chooses to do with the information. Very, very sensitive. And I think we got a neat little window into that. Let's do some background, too, so people are tracking. So the president receives a briefing every day called the PDB, or the President's Daily Briefing. And it's like a newspaper. It's got articles in it that say, here's a title, here's a lead paragraph, here's the substantive things. And it's written now with a lot of like, here's a thing that we say is true, and here's some evidence that proves that to be true. And there's some assessment language. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be for President Kennedy, who had the first one, which was called the pickle. That document was usually just like a couple of paragraphs, and it didn't say much. It's grown and evolved over time, and now the president receives not a piece of paper or a binder, but they receive something on electronic medium. Sometimes it's video, sometimes it's audio, sometimes it's text. Just kind of depends on what the president's consuming patterns are like. So it's a very special thing to get selected for this role too, because obviously you've got to have these skills of knowing how to protect classified things, how to build trust, how to express direction from the highest customer in the land without breaching what they need to have for the next iteration of the PDB. And it's delivered 6 days a week. The only day off is Sunday. And it's done worldwide. So I'm not going to spoil what Jim gets into. But I'll tell you kind of how I think about this. I mean, trust. I like how you kind of pre-stage this, is that there are conversations where someone kind of has to tell you, like, either at the beginning or at the end, hey, I'm about to tell you something you can't tell somebody else. Or at the end of it is like, hey, can you not spread that around and tell anybody else? Like, I think I view those kinds of conversations as, how do I want to say this? An extension of honor, right? You are trusting me with some sensitive information I'm not going to share with other people, and I respect you enough not to share those secrets, or even not even secrets, but just some sensitive information. So that's how I think about it. I will say this, that holding a security clearance, and we've talked about this before, is kind of a burden, right? There's lifestyle changes, there's information you're going to get exposed to, and some people respect and honor that and say, I'm not going to disclose things. Some people don't, and I think that's the hardest thing to navigate now that I'm out, is that I still view that privilege as very honorable, and I'm really disappointed when I see folks who have decided not to honor that and have leaked information to the press, or things like that. Anyway, that's my answer.
Well, that's a timely, tie-in, right? Because we just had that with the whole made-for-TV movie of our, Iranian downed pilot's rescue mission. And there were multiple side stories about that. And for me, that was such a win for the CIA. Man, they haven't had a good news story in a while. And I was like, look at the military and the IC working together. I had several family members who'd be like, hey, because they always feel like, any affiliation I have with the intelligence community, they view as a strong negative, right? It's not in my favor, but they're like, hey, look, you are helping the military. And I'm like, yes, that actually happens. That's how it's supposed to happen. They aren't working against each other, but you had those examples, and then drove me bananagrams, because then you have that press conference too. And I just love it. It's like, this guy has to be in the made for TV movie too, where like Trump's up there and he's like, the press is asking him questions, and he should know adversarial nature enough about the press. Like, yeah, they're trying to get you while you're excited to tell you things they probably shouldn't. It's like, can we tell them how many people? And General Kane, love him. Like, one of my favorite people is they're like, I would rather not say that, sir. And I was like, I love that. Like, but you could tell, Trump, like, the president's enthusiasm is just so much there. But I think that is the difference of somebody who grew up in a culture of transparency as a currency. Mm-hmm. And I value that too, right? And that's like, for me, like the big believer I believe in, like, trusted information, is because also we have a prevalence too much to hold too many secrets. That's why I think we're both shared advocates for OSINT and open source and public, and being, the IC not being secret squirrely about things that aren't. But then the problem is when you've kind of weaponized it in this way, then you do get very much like one good, one evil, right? And people come from either one background or the other. Like, I don't want to even talk to anybody, and I don't want to say anything, and that doesn't help. Or people who literally just could not identify a secret if it literally was stamped top secret. And then how do those two groups work together for the greater good?
I think, just to build on your point, is that the reason why keeping secrets and marking things as secret and treating it as such is important, aside from the national security implications, but it's overclassification also is a problem, like you're talking about. Like, things that are known in the public domain, but we treat them like secrets bureaucratically in the government. My opinion is that diminishes the actual importance of, no kidding, secrets. So if you're telling me, hey, the way I got this was in the newspaper, okay, got it. That's not classified. But if you take it from the newspaper and then make it classified, well, now the value of that data drops, because now I can't send it to as many people, and it's not really a secret. And so that label has value, that label has meaning. So every time we take something unclassified and make it secret, that doesn't help. I did think it was funny, though, General King. God, I'd prefer to keep that secret.
I'd prefer.
As the head declassification authority for the United States government, please don't declassify that.
Hey, but he could. As people push back all the time, it's like, well, the president's in charge, so but hey, but that's what a good exchange looks like. I hope, right? the president is allowed to ask his people that have the authority over that, and then they should say no. Like, they should, respectfully say, no, this is helpful for us, and then build that culture of understanding why this is, right? And to your point, even to get back to the PDP, like, I imagine through that process, I don't know what it's like today, right? But there is some conversational aspect of, like, explaining, because that's the big thing about the IC. Like, you have these assessments, and we don't always have a unified opinion, even amongst the IC agencies. And I've heard from other people who talking to the PDP process that becomes a valuable source of information to brief too. Like, hey, Mr. President, this is the assessment from this entity and this is this one. Congratulations. Now you get to take these two information products and make your executive, decision, based on this, because there isn't always consensus even amongst the IC on things.
Yeah,
that makes me feel better, but some people feel worse about this. Like, we don't always have, there's different perspectives.
Well, and I think it's a humbling thing to admit as an intelligence officer, to say, like, I don't have the answer. Like, I'm making an assessment on this given question, but I don't know, and there are no certainties in intelligence anyway. So you always say, well, we have high confidence. That doesn't mean absolute certainty, and if we learn nothing from the Iraq WMD, commission experience, saying things like, we are absolutely certain that's true. Sometimes it doesn't work out. We're absolutely certain Saddam's got weapons of mass destruction.
Define. The definitions matter too, though. That was big about that, right? Because you can come back and what is a weapon of mass destruction? What is the category of that? Like, there's still people that feel very much, and this came out of INSA, right? We have a shared love for INSA. They had a recent talk on agentic AI, and Linda Weisgold, another veteran PDP briefer, was on there and talking about how one of the most important things you can say, especially in a world of AI, is how not just the conclusion that you made or the data that you have, but how you made that conclusion and where you got that data, because that's going to lead to, again, that's why every intelligence agency often has its own trade craft, its own sources, its own flavor of how it got there. And that's how the road leads you different places, because you have different sources, methods, information. But especially in a world of AI that can come to a lot of conclusions quickly for us, being able to, the important thing isn't always the information you're presenting, but how you got it, where it came from.
Well, and I think the intelligence community is still kind of, not quite sure if they're going to do a full adoption of AI. And I think moving deliberately and slowly is probably smart. But one way or another, you're going to have to tackle it, because we have so much that's being produced in the open domain. You've got to explain. Like, have you seen these videos that the Iranians are putting out, the Lego videos?
No.
Oh, my goodness. You got to see these videos. They're propaganda videos. They're done by AI, but they are very well done. Speaking objectively, they are very well done. They are put to hip hop music. They're in English. They're very flashy. It's got Lego characters, and they're playing the various parts of the president and Iranian military members and military assets and things like that. And they basically are casting dispersion on American policy against Iran, which has been around forever. But they are able to turn these things out really fast, and they can test them to see what audience absorption looks like. And they're using AI to do all that stuff. So, yes, today there are probably PDB briefers in front of the president saying, sir, this is how this is created. This is why they're doing it. Here's who we know who's doing it. Like, all of those details. Well, you can't know that unless you know how AI works and how those videos were generated and having collection assets against them. Like, the future is now. And being able to communicate something that's really complicated, not easy. That's a very skilled person in front of that president explaining that stuff. So we were very lucky to hear Jim's story and get a little bit of insight into how the president absorbs information and what he's doing now. So I won't spoil it for everybody. So here's our interview with Jim Danoy. That's true.
to find out some candid stuff?
I do.
Some juicy stuff that you could use against them at the podcast?
Sometimes. I mean, not always.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Is this Dorothy? You can
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Give us a close.
Okay. This is the inner sanctum now, so.
Yeah. There we go. Well, hey, Jim, thanks for making time to come see us.
My pleasure, Brian. Anything for you.
Is that right?
True. Yes.
I'm going to need $10,000. You said anything.
Well, talk to my Minister of Finance, my wife, and she'll...
Okay. I've met your wife. She's very, very nice.
She is very nice, and she's actually former DIA, as you know.
Well, and there's a genuine mystery I'm hoping you can unravel for me. Like, I met her.
Yes.
Very nice, very sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And she said yes. She married you.
She did marry me.
How did that happen?
And she married me even before I was what I turned out to be. So, in fact, she made me what I am today.
Ooh.
I mean, when we met, I was working in a grocery store as a grocery clerk. And, oh, by the way, I love to tell this story because, before you get into all these probing questions you're going to ask me, I felt that working in a grocery store was probably the best training for being an intelligence officer.
Interesting.
And you'll go, Brian, Jim, what do you mean? Well, because, think about it, Brian. All businesses have their particular clientele, right? If I worked in a ski rental shop, certain clientele probably have money, probably know how to ski, I would hope. And but everybody needs to eat. So you get all kinds of people. Nice people, maybe not so nice people, people who are really, really smart, people who are really, really good at other things, people who maybe talk to themselves in line in the grocery store.
Yeah.
But it was really great training because, there I was, and I did a number of things. Worked in the pharmacy, worked stocking shelves, but particularly when I was running the register, and you're there for 8 hours a day, and you're meeting people, and you have to engage with them, and sometimes they would unload on you in terms of what their problems of the day were, or sometimes they didn't like the fact that milk went up, a nickel or something.
Right.
So you have to engage, and you learn a lot of interpersonal skills, and you learn a lot about people. Yeah. And you can't escape because you're sitting there, or standing, I should say, for 8 hours. And it's not like you could run away.
Right.
And you could see them a mile away as they're coming, or you can see them in line. So that kind of engagement, I really, really felt it was, I would recommend, forget the farm if you want to be a case officer. Just become a grocery clerk. And you will learn all about human nature, and you will be a most successful intelligence officer.
It is interesting because when you are interacting with the public in any job, you can learn a whole heck of a lot about what's going on in their personal life. I worked several different retail jobs, but I worked in a bookstore, a big chain, and called Books A Million. It's really a Southern thing. I did it when I was going to school in Georgia. And, I was introduced to the field of loss prevention. This is basically what we counter shoplifting, right? And you met some folks that, if they'd only turn their skills to good instead of evil, very inventive, very clever. Mm-hmm. But you learn a lot about human nature, and but
they liked books, apparently. Otherwise,
they did.
Why would they go to Books A Million?
They did. They liked stealing at the time. See, this is how old I am. They liked stealing CDs.
Oh, I got you.
CDs had a lot more, currency of trade.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had CDs, and we told them when they decided to start selling those, like, we probably should put in, like, sensors and the things where you pass through and it'll gives the alarm. Oh, no, we can't afford that.
But
you can afford
afford all that money going out.
Yeah, all the
out
inventory.
The door. Right.
Cool, great. No, it sounds good. Well, Jim, thanks for coming here. So I've known you for quite a while. I don't think most of our audience has. So do you mind kind of telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I spent 38 years in the intelligence community. As I said, you already know I was a grocery clerk.
We got that down.
But 38 years in the intelligence community. I started actually at the FBI many years ago. We're talking early 80s, just after the Earth's crust cooled and the dinosaurs had, all died off, I started working at the FBI. And I started as a GS3 file clerk. And if anybody out there in the audience knows, the general schedule pay scale, well, GS3 in 1982 paid $10,649 a year. Wow. And in fact, I had to take a pay cut. I was working at Giant Food, working my way through college and everything. And I was making more money, Brian, part-time working for Giant than I was going to make working for the FBI. And Vicki, my wife, my bride, we were newlyweds. I remember that I got a call. I was working at the grocery store. I got a call from an FBI agent. And my assistant manager came down, and I was working the register, and he said, hey, I just got a call from the FBI asking about you. He said, do you want to tell me something? So quick explanation. He kind of said, oh, okay. Went outside. No cell phones at the time, so I went out to the pay phone, called the bureau, and they offered me the job. And I was so excited, I called Vicki. And being a good wife, particularly being a good newlywed wife, she said, okay, what are they paying you? And I told her, and all of a sudden there was a silence. I thought I thought we lost the connection. And she said, what? And I said, hey, I said, honey, it's my foot in the door, and I'm gonna make the best of it,
right.
And so I never thought that years and years and years later, and I'm speeding up here in our conversation, that one day I would be the President's Daily Briefer giving the PDB to President Obama. So that's kind of how it started, And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I really think that the best intelligence officers that I ever met were ones that worked in retail or did something beforehand, and then they came in. Not to say that if you come straight from college into the intelligence community, you're not going to be successful. There's many examples of that. But just having those life experiences and starting, really at the bottom, I learned a lot, and I had a lot of great mentors along the way. Because as you and I know, and all of us in the business that we were in, know that you don't make it on your own. Intelligence is a team sport. So I want to do a shout out for my first boss, Ed Appel, supervisory special agent, FBI, Ed Appel, who was a great mentor for me when I started as a file clerk. He didn't have to. I was just a file clerk. We were working foreign counterintelligence. The Soviet Union still existed, and we were trying to catch spies. And I was working in the branch that dealt with what we call the non-Soviet Warsaw Pact countries. The East Germanies, Czechoslovakia, that country no longer exists, as
right.
we know. Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, those countries. And the Bureau derisively called them the nose-wipe countries. Non-Soviet, think about it, non-Soviet Warsaw Pact, the nose-wipe countries.
Right.
And some of them were pretty tough because they were doing a lot of the dirty work that the Soviets didn't want to have their fingerprints on, so like the Bulgarians. The East Germans had, of course, had a great, very, very capable intelligence service. So he took me under his wing, and I learned a lot, and I owe it to him because who knows? I could have been a flash-in-the-pan file clerk and said, hey, this is not for me. But he really nurtured my desire to serve in some way, serve the country, and it went on from there.
But you didn't stay at the Bureau. I
did not stay in the Bureau. I have students. I teach now as I'm an adjunct professor over at George Mason University. And, now we have the internet and we can go on and say, hey, go to CIA.gov or DIA.mil and find out. Well, in those days, there was none of that. So some of you boomers out there, if you remember, there was a publication that had all the federal jobs. It was on marigold-colored paper. It was like tissue paper, and it listed all of the jobs. So I went through there constantly and just writing letters and making phone calls, and then, the Bureau happened to be the first one that called. So over a year later, later on, after I was in the Bureau, and I made it from 3 to GS4 to GS5, I got a call from DIA. Because I had put in an application for them, a long, long time ago. They said, hey, do you still want to work for DIA? And I did. I said, yeah, I enjoyed working at the Bureau. It was a great start, but it looked like that was a great adventure. And so I got picked up by DIA, and my first assignment was down at the Washington Navy Yard working at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which is now part of what is now NGA. It was one of the precursor agencies of NGA. And that was really a great experience because I thought I got hired by DIA, right? And I go down to the Navy Yard, and Robert Cardillo was there. This is 1983. I met Robert Cardillo in the lobby of the Washington Navy Yard on our EOD dates, our entry onto duty dates at the Navy Yard. And then they separated us, and Robert was going to be DIA, and they said, okay, you guys are going to go over here and work for the Imagery Exploitation Branch over at DIA. And then someone started walking that way, not so fast, sport. You are going to stay here, and you're going to work at INPIC. And I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what INPIC was.
Right.
And we said, INPIC, okay. Yeah, the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which in those days was run by CIA. They were the executive agent. It was 90% CIA, and there was the few and the proud, 10% DIA officers. And I thought I said, what's wrong with me? How come I'm not going over there with the rest of the DIA people? But you know what, Brian? I thought it turned out to be even better in the sense that we at INPIC were able to be on our own. And, if you were an imagery analyst in those days at DIA, you kind of worked under the supervision of an all-source analyst, and you did certain things, and you did great things. But at INPIC, we didn't have that. We were on our own. In fact, my first boss was a CIA officer. His name is Dick Jordan. He's passed away. But he was a great officer, and he told me, he said, hey, you are an all-source analyst who uses imagery as your primary source of information. And I'll never forget that. It was like, okay. And we did our own thing. So it was a great way to start into the big leagues, because being an imagery analyst, I learned a lot about collection. Here I am, a junior analyst. And oh, by the way, I was the only GS5 imagery analyst, apparently in INPIC history, because I came from the Bureau as a 5, and I didn't have enough time and grade. And so they said, oh, you got to...
It's a lateral.
Yeah, it was a lateral.
Wow.
It was a lateral. And in fact, my bosses there said, hey, there's a mistake here. It has you listed as a GS5. We only have 7s and 9s and 11s here. And I had to put my time in grade before I got up to a 7. But, it was a great way as a junior analyst to learn the business. And here I am, a junior analyst tasking a multi-billion-dollar satellite. And I do remember in the graduation ceremony that we had when I graduated from imagery school at INPIC, there was this very distinguished silver-haired gentleman on the stage, and he was talking about you're going to see things in denied areas that nobody else has seen before, and you're going to do some amazing things. Because, the big target was the Soviet Union in those days. And he started talking about, I remember when I briefed the president about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then I said, oh my gosh, this guy, is the guy that, briefed the president, So it was and that INPIC had this great history involved in it. So, yeah.
And so you were hooked. You're in.
I was definitely hooked. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you said something that resonates with me, because when I onboarded at DIA, they give you a full briefing of like, here's our full capabilities, where all our people are, what we're endowed to do, and how we partner with folks. And I was just astounded at the enormity of responsibility being laid on your shoulders, and I was humbled by that experience. Because I worked at DIA as a contractor for years, but I didn't know all these things. Right. And they were going through, like, here's where we're all positioned, and here's what all we do, here's the types of things that we've done, all classified, of course. And so you're sitting back like, wow, it's a real honor to be a part of that legacy, that history, and you're going to let me do that? And pay me to do it? That's awesome.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a very eye-opening experience, and it is a very humbling experience. But I like to believe, and I know you're attracting the right people who are motivated by that. I tell my students, hey, if you want to be famous, go to Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be rich, go to Wall Street. But if you want to serve your country, hey, we have a place for you. You're not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to be able to go home and tell your mom and dad and your wife, hey, you know what I did today?
Right.
You just do it because it needs to be done. And that's enough for you to just keep doing it,
So when did you kind of get into the European theater, NATO, those sorts of things?
Yeah.
When did that kind of come in your career trajectory?
That was always, I go back and I think, because sometimes people say, hey, what motivated you to even get into the business at all? And I go back to, my parents were great. They've since passed away. But my dad he was in sales, and he raised an entire family working on commission. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, but then I thought, as I grew older, I said, oh my gosh, you're out there, you're trying to bring in the bacon, and you're out there. It's all you. You've got to learn how to engage with folks and win them over and do it in an honest way. My dad was extremely humble and honest man. There was nothing phony about him. But you have to sell yourself to somebody. And I'll talk about later how that guided me through my entire career and to this day. But he was a great salesman, and he had on his coffee table, he won this atlas, this Rand McNally atlas that used to sit in our living room. It was great. It had, all the countries and the flags and everything else. And I used to go through this as a kid and say, oh my gosh, I want to do that. I want to see the world. I want to do something that has something to do with international relations and be able to travel and have some kind of impact. And so, it was always in the back of my mind. So I did take, when I went to school, and I'm a proud George Mason University alum. So when I went to Mason, I took government and international relations. They didn't have the programs that now the Schar School has, but you could kind of focus. You could take government and politics and focus, take some courses that focused on international relations. And I always liked Europe. I don't know what it was. I think it was because my dad had some books about the Second World War and history and what happened in the European theater. And I thought, well, if I'm going to major in some region, I want to go to a place where, the going is good. Hey, Paris is really nice. London is nice. And so, I focused on Europe. And then later on, I got a master's degree in modern European history. So, and I did that at a time where it was great. It was the late 80s. Mm. So here I am. I'm already at DIA. And I'd already done my imagery tour, did some all source analysis, and found myself in the Pentagon in the JCS-J2.
Which is what?
By the Joint Chiefs of Staff J2. It's the Intelligence Directorate of the Joint Staff. And, by the way, part of DIA, manned by Defense Intelligence Agency officers. And so I had a region where people say, hey, nobody cares about Europe. Nothing's happened in Europe for, since the Second World War. Nobody cares. So, but I had a passion for it. I really enjoyed it. As a college student, I spent time in Europe. And so traveling around. And then the wall comes down. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, everybody wants to know what's going on in Europe. Mm-hmm. And I had focused, my master's degree was focused on Central and Eastern Europe. Took a little Polish, to learn a little bit about Poland. And in fact, Poland was my first country that I was really focused on in the J2. And so the wall comes down. Everybody is interested in what's going on. Former Yugoslavia is breaking up. And so timing is everything, too, as you're going through your career. And here's where I'll have another shout out for another person who, at a really critical time in my career, I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for this individual. His name's Brad Knopp. You may know Brad.
Yeah.
And so he was in the J2 at the time in the front office, and then he became the Defense Intelligence Officer for Europe.
Right.
And I was working the Balkans. I was in the Balkans task force, the Yugoslav task force in the J2. And he was looking for, they were building out the defense intelligence officers at that time. We're talking the early 90s now. And so the walls come down, the world's changing, and Europe's become important. So Brad was in the market for an assistant, and I applied for the job, and I got it. And I learned so much as his assistant defense intelligence officer in the working through the 90s up until the late 90s, just watching how he operated, how he engaged, how the defense intelligence officer, the roles changed a little bit, but back then, the DIO, as we call them, were the chief substantive experts in their region or functional area. And they still are, but, over the years, sometimes the role has changed back and forth. But the DIOs were, when we were there, they were it. I mean, they were it in terms of the substantive review of the products that DIA was producing. The engagement, the big thing was housed in the Pentagon, engaging with the policymakers, the E-ring of the Pentagon, those in OSD policy and elsewhere. And so just learning how he operated and also nurturing our foreign intelligence relationships, which are so, so important. And that was a big part of the DIO Europe portfolio because most of our relationships, intelligence relationships, were, with our European partners. Of course, everybody knows about the Five Eyes relationships with the UK, Canada, New Zealand, or Australia. But I just learned how he engaged, how he was able to leverage our intelligence relationships, our collectors, our defense human collectors, interacting with the policymakers. I learned so, so much. And I really attribute everything that followed later in my career to his tutelage.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think the public kind of generally understands this, but because intelligence is an element of national power, we'll have things like foreign intelligence exchanges where we'll tell you something, you tell us something, which is a very highly orchestrated thing, sometimes done in their country, sometimes done here. But you have to have agency leadership over top of that that says, these will be the things we talk about. We will not be talking about these things. And that kind of leadership and stewardship and wisdom comes from folks that have been in the field a long time. So you benefited from a lot of what Brad had to tell you, and you eventually assumed that role.
Absolutely. I remember one of our seniors in the agency at the time, Dave Curtin, who had been a defense intelligence officer himself. We had a conversation about, it was part of that career. I had just come back from overseas. I was over at NATO for a while, and you're trying to reintegrate back into the the home office, so to speak. And I told Dave, I really want to be a DIO, and Dave, was trying to be kind to me in the sense he was trying to give me good career advice. He said, well, Jim, that's great. I'm glad you had that aspiration, but there's only one DIO, and if you only you might not get that. There's only one of them.
Right.
And I said, Dave, I understand that. I fully understand that, but that's really what I want. I really want to do. And so Dave, he helped me in the sense that he gave me some seasoning. He said, okay, well, you need some management experience. And so he said, we're going to make you the Europe division chief. And this was around 2000, 2001.
Oh, yes.
And so I was, on 9/11, I was supposed to be at the Pentagon for a meeting, but I happened to be over at DI headquarters across the river. And we all know what happened, and we could see the Pentagon burning and all that. And the world was going to change for all of us. But Dave gave me that Europe management experience, which I hadn't had. And then later on, after 9/11, I said, hey, I want to support the effort. And so I went right back to the Pentagon and helped support the standing up of the intelligence task force. So we had the Enduring Freedom Task Force there at the Pentagon, while the Pentagon was still smoldering at the time. But Dave gave me that experience, and then an opportunity came to bring back the DIOs in a way that under Robert Cardillo, when he was the director for analysis, and I competed and got the job as the DIO for Europe and NATO.
Right.
We added the NATO aspect to it.
So in the midst of fighting enduring freedom, that's a pretty important job, yes?
Yeah, well, I spent 2 years, the next 2 years working global war on terrorism issues. And then we were doing a lot of things, and then DIA was reorganizing, and the DI folks in DIA and the J2 analytic elements merged, and I was asked to be the senior intelligence officer for what we called the Joint Intelligence Analysis Office, JIA, which, I got handpicked to be the senior intelligence analyst for that, which was great because they wanted somebody who had some DIAC experience, DIA headquarters experience, and somebody who had done tours in the Joint Staff, J2.
So you do that gig for a little while.
Yeah.
You're doing a little bit of statecraft, a little bit of counterterrorism. What was your next step after that?
Well, I got promoted to the senior ranks, became the Defense Intelligence Officer for Europe, NATO. Thought, hey, I could. This is it, man. I could retire and be very satisfied with the contributions that I've made to national security. Never thought I would make it this far. Because you're at the top of the analytic pyramid as a DIO, as a defense intelligence officer, and working with the NIOs, the national intelligence officers, and all of that on NIEs. And I got promoted, and I was going off to senior school, capstone, where flag rank officers and senior executives get to hang out and learn how to be seniors. But, it's funny if you don't by now. Exactly, if you don't know by now, then the course is not going to help you.
Right.
But it is very useful, and there's a lot of bonding experience that goes to that, and networking, which is very important.
That's
as
the primary purpose.
Yeah, as you move forward. Literally, Brian, as I'm walking out the door to go to 6 weeks of capstone, General Burgess, who was our director at the time at DIA, one of his colonels from the front office says, "Hey." But, by the way, General Burgess wants to put your name forward to be President Obama's briefer. And I said, oh, that's interesting. This is the first I've heard of this. Oh, okay. I'm literally at the door. And I said, well, just keep me informed, how it goes on. So during the class, periodically, this is still in the works. General Burgess had done, he had worked over at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. They wanted somebody from DIA to be the president's briefer. Nobody other than a CIA officer up at that time had ever been the PDB briefer for the president. It was CIA's job. Over the years, we had a DIA officer had been the PDB briefer for the vice president, and that was a great milestone for our agency, DIA, and others. But the president, that was the crown jewel, and CIA had it, and they wanted to keep it. And so I was,
You were skeptical that you actually would be advanced.
Well, first of all, I was just honored that I was even considered.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah.
This is
Absolutely.
not a job that you apply for. Like, hey, I want to be, hey, man, make me the president's briefer. So to be even in contention was amazing. So make a long story short, I go to school, I come back. Robert Cardilla asked me, say, you still interested? And I said, well, what do you say? It's an incredible honor. And so Robert told me, okay, you'll get a call probably about a week or so. Sure enough, I get a call, report up to Langley for an interview. I go up there, and I'm ushered into this office. And Brian, it was like a star chamber. It was like I open the door. There's one seat on the head of the table, and that's for me. And there was just a who's who of people. Of seniors from the intelligence community, and we have this, exchange. I wouldn't call it an interview as much as it was. It wasn't an interrogation, but it was just, hey, how would you react in situations like this? What do you think about being the president's briefer? What are the things that you would do in situations like this? And it was probably the most interesting interview I've ever had. And I've had a number of interviews in my career. And they said, okay, we'll get back to you in a week or so. Sure enough, I'm back in my office at the Pentagon. I get a call from Peter Lavoie, who was one of the seniors over in the OD&I, and he said, "Hey, congratulations, Jim. We think you have what it takes to be the president's briefer." And that was incredible. And then he told me something that to this day, really makes me feel good. And, he said, we talked to a lot of people during this process. We talked to a lot of people about you, and they had nothing but good things to say about you. And that made me feel good.
No kidding.
Even if I hadn't got the job, because the way my mom and dad brought me up and what I told my girls, both of whom went into the intelligence community, was, look, just work hard, treat people decently, and honestly, don't complain. Be a team player. Nobody likes to hang around with somebody who's, that's complaining. You just do it and get along with people and get things done. And so that made me feel good, because that's what I had always strived for, and that's what the advice that I gave my kids, and what I give as a mentor is like, be a team player. Be the one that they want to think about when they're building a team. In fact, when I went to NDU, National Defense University, as a student, I did a paper on building high-performance teams, and I focused on the interpersonal skills that are extremely important in that regard. You can know a lot. Expertise is important, of course, and there's other qualities that are important. But the interpersonal skills, connecting with people, how do you motivate people? Those are the things. Getting the best out of everybody. Looking around the table and saying, how could these individuals contribute to the mission? Everybody brings something to the table, and sometimes they don't even know it. But you've got to, elicit it and bring it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, relationships are important. I'm sure, as thinking back in retrospect, as you're talking about CIA relinquishing and saying we're going to let a non-CIA officer become the president's briefer, I'm sure one of the things that was important to them is, okay, what is this person's relationship with CIA?
With
and,
the agency.
What's his history or her history?
Right.
All of those things. And so, are they a team player? And can we trust them, and can we rely on them to do the mission?
So, yes, tremendous honor, but also kind of the dog that's caught the coal truck, right? This is not an easy job. This is a tough job.
Yep.
And I say that knowing that, but you tell us, why is it a hard job?
Well, it's not an on-the-job training job. It's one that, there's jobs you take and you learn. You really have to come to the job. It's a culmination, basically, of all the things you've done during your career. It's not a testing ground. It's not like, hey, let's pick Jane or Joe and see if, just see if it works out. You really have to come prepared. It's not about you. That's the important thing. It's you are representing all the hard work of the women and men of the intelligence community. You are presenting those positions. If you think it's about you, you're automatically the wrong person, because you're representing the intelligence community's position on these things. It's physically taxing, of course, and it's mentally taxing. That's why the job usually is only a year. I spent a little over a year on that job. There's some others that have lasted longer. The position, from what I can gather, has changed a little bit over the years. But when I was doing it, you were on call all the time, and I and you're expected to hit a home run every time. It's almost like, if to use a sports metaphor, you're a baseball player. You can't afford to just hit a single or, heaven forbid, strike out. You're expected to perform and to do it in a way that is that represents the intelligence community well, and you're delivering news that obviously sometimes the customer isn't welcome to hear, but they need to hear it. You have to be able to synthesize a lot of information as you're going through the preparation. For example, I used to wake up at 11 o'clock at night. My wife would be there. She would go to bed after I left, but I'd wake up at 11 p.m., be at Langley about midnight, work through. And in those days, I'm not sure what it is exactly today, but you were the last quality control of the President's Daily Brief, the articles and short articles or longer articles that were put in there. Sometimes you'd come back and say, hey, this isn't ready for prime time. We need to answer a few things that are coming up. So you would do that, and then you would. I liken it again to cramming for finals every day. Jeez. And getting that information right. I had my own technique to do it. I would just write out some bullets, points that I would like to make clear. The bottom line up front is extremely important. Getting to the why is this important to you, Mr. President, is very important. Those sorts of things. And then about 5 a.m., the authors of the briefings would come in, and I would be able to ask them questions like, why do you think the president should take time out of his busy schedule to read your piece? Most of the analysts knew that. Sometimes they didn't. I said, well, you really need to know that even before you write the article. Know your customer. Why? Why are you writing this piece? Why is it important to the president as a senior decision maker? So, and that goes on. And then I got to travel with them all over the country, all over the world. And so you're always on and knowing all the time that you are representing the intelligence community. If you screw up, oh yeah, it might reflect badly on Jim, but it also reflects badly on the entire intelligence community. So I wouldn't even, sometimes after a full day, we're heading to Andrews and getting on Air Force One, and you're flying across there, and other people had a busy day and they're taking a nap. If somebody was awake, I remember my first trip on Air Force One. We were heading to Prague, and Dennis McDonough, who was at the time was the Deputy National Security, I could see the glow of his laptop in the seat, and he was working. I said, as long as he's up, I'm up. I can't, The last thing you want to do, Brian, is somebody says, hey, where's our intel guy? And you're snoozing with your mouth agape and, drool coming out of your mouth. Right. So, oh, yeah, there it is, intel, asleep at the switch. So you constantly have to be on, constantly.
Wow.
And so, yeah, there's a lot there. But Brian, the adrenaline is there. You're supporting the President of the United States, and my goodness.
Yeah.
Never could have believed it.
How few people actually get to do that.
Well, yeah, those are the days where you're all giddy in the sense that you're talking to the pilot of Air Force One, you're talking to the other people that are supporting, and all of us, to a person, would go, did you ever think? Did you ever imagine? Could you have ever imagined? Yeah. And in my case, even when I was coming up through the ranks, that was not attainable because CIA was the one.
Had a lock,
Yeah. So it was like, my goodness, I just can't believe this is happening.
I want to connect two dots for our audience.
Sure.
I don't know if you'd be comfortable explaining it, but I'll say it.
Yeah.
That vetting process for you being selected is incredibly difficult as an agency employee. As an outsider, it would have been 10 times, especially being the first, like that vetting. And then I can imagine the food fight amongst the seniors around the table. I don't know about this guy. Well, I got a good rep, and then we move on. But it also comes with it the full backing of the community. So if you deliver bad news to the president and the president doesn't like the messenger and decides, I want that guy out, that doesn't happen. The community comes behind and says, no, this is your guy. There's no one else behind him. This is it. Right. And that's done deliberately because you don't want to have that improper influence over the intelligence cycle. Like, well, we're not really telling the boss what he wants to hear, so we need to change how we're telling that story so that we don't get fired again. Right? There's a piece of that objectivity that's a part of our culture was important to advance, and it's embodied in that briefer. So I want to get us into the room here. Tell us about a time you're in front of the president and you had to tell some particularly difficult news and how you handled that.
Yeah. Well, I think I was fortunate. Everything is so hyper-politicized now, and it is difficult for intelligence officers to navigate through that because we are told, and it is extremely important, Our job is to provide objective intelligence. I mean, that's our code, that's our ethos, that's our mission, and we have to focus razor sharp or laser sharp onto that. I tell my students the first day of class, I say, hey, we're gonna explore a lot of things, we're gonna learn a lot of things. You know, the course I teach really goes soup to nuts across the business of intelligence. But I tell them this: I said, if you remember anything out of this course, remember this: it's about personal and professional integrity. Okay, because if you do not have that, nothing I'm going to tell you and nothing you're going to learn through the rest of this course is going to matter. Now, is integrity? You know, you can say, yeah, integrity is important. Yeah, this, but when it's tested, right. That's when the rubber meets the road. So I was always conscious, going back to what we were talking about earlier, about interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate properly. But it's beyond just communicating. Communicating is important, but you have to connect. You have to connect with your customer. It's like the difference between hearing and listening. Mm-hmm. Connecting. So how do you build that trust? Because to go back to what I was saying about my dad being a salesman, I tell folks all the time. I would tell them when I was an intelligence officer. I tell it to folks today. You're in marketing and sales, and they go like, "What? Yeah, I'm in intelligence." Yeah, you're in intelligence, but you're in marketing and sales. Your product is your assessment. So you have an assessment, but you have to sell that assessment. It could be the best assessment in the world. It could be spot on. But if you cannot communicate it properly, if you cannot connect with the customer, if you cannot convince the customer to accept that,
who cares?
Right. It won't matter. And so, actually, sometimes it will matter, because if they don't take your advice,
yes,
bad things could happen.
Yes.
So, in the room, President Obama, who is the briefer the president that I was briefing to, in my opinion, was a good customer because of this. All politics aside, I think he understood the role of the intelligence officer, and that's important, because in order for it to work, it's a partnership between you and the customer, based on mutual trust. They understand your role and respect your role. You understand and respect their role. President Obama never put me in a position where, hey, Jim, what do you think? You make policy for me. What do you think about this? He never asked me that. And it's, the reason I say that is some people, when I speak to groups on occasion about the experience, they ask, hey, did the president ever tell you, should I do this, should I do that? And I say no. And they go, really? No, because that's not my role, and he knew that was not my role. And nor would I, take on that role. And so you take this in, you have to read the customer. President Obama was receptive to hearing bad news, as long as you can explain. It's not just about, here's our assessment. In fact, let me just talk about what my thoughts were. Years ago, you might think, the intelligence community would come in with an assessment, say, here's our assessment, Brian. You got to take it or leave it, because we have access to information that you don't have,
right.
And we're not going to share that with you, but you're just going to have to trust us. Well, that might work for a while, and then things happen like 9/11 or Iraq WMD, and you lose that card. You played that card, and it doesn't work. So you got to go back to, we want to see your homework. So I never felt that afraid to provide bad news. Sure, you don't want to do it. We're all Americans. We want everything to go well for our country. But if you're able to explain, this is the assessment and here's the explanation, and understand that you are in the business of informing decision making, and so it's important for the customer to know these things. If you're only getting what you want to hear, you're going to walk away with everything is going well, and then you hit a roadblock and you're wondering, oh my gosh, how did this happen? So, decision makers need all of those sides, and not just bad news, opportunities, which I think we we as a community say we need to do more of that opportunity analysis as well. It's not just all threat assessments, but opportunity analysis as well. So I'm not sure if I'm getting exactly to the point that you were talking about, but I was just saying, it's built on a foundation of trust, a track record of showing your competence, showing that you're not just saying this is what's happening, but explain how we got to an assessment. I can tell you an assessment and say, Brian, this is our assessment. Period. End of story. Take it or leave it. Or I could say, this is our assessment, and it's based on a single source, and it's based on a single source of undetermined reliability, and that we have low confidence in that assessment, et cetera. And all of a sudden you see, okay, that's a lot different from just saying this is our assessment.
Right.
So the important thing when you're dealing with any customer, obviously the president, who is, by the way, cleared for all the information that you're going to provide, is to provide that texture and that detail. Extremely important. And so I spent a lot of time, not just on the assessment, but doing the homework and explaining, this is what it's based on, these are the sources and all of that, because you need that context. Context is really everything when you're talking about providing assessments.
And how much time do you have in front of the president?
Normally we'd have 30 minutes. 30 minutes. It'd be 9:30 to 10.
That's more than I would think.
Sometimes it would go shorter than that. Sometimes it might go longer than that. On the road, it was a little different. The dynamic was completely different on the road. And you would go in, and my first briefing on Air Force One was we were heading out, and we were about to land, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll meet the president later, maybe at the hotel or whatever. And his assistant came in and said, hey, the boss wants to see you now. I said, okay. We're starting to descend. Okay, so let's, game on. So go in there and brief him, and he's getting ready to, meet a crowd. He's doing his thing to get ready, and we're landing. And I'm briefing him while he's getting ready. And I'm thinking, boy, they don't teach you this in Intel school. And we're hitting a little turbulence and all that, and you go through that. And so you have, in that case, you have maybe a minute. So you got to compress everything. And again, what does this mean? You've got to read the room, even when we'd have our oval sessions. Sometimes you go in there and you have to be aware of what's going on that day. Sometimes there's busy stuff going on. We're probably not going to have 30 minutes today. So, Mr. President, I know it's a busy day for you. This is it. This is bing, bing, bing. If the president wants more information, they'll ask.
Right.
That's not a problem.
Right.
But get across what you need. So I always tell my students, prepare three briefs. Let's say you have 30 minutes, so prepare your 30-minute briefing, prepare a 3-minute briefing, and prepare a 30-second briefing.
Wow, yeah.
Because that will then force you to compress and get to that point where now you have the essence. That 30-second briefing that you've distilled from 30 minutes really is what the important stuff is. Because you could go in an office, and it's not like they don't like you, but they go, hey, Brian, I know, or Jim, I know we had 30 minutes, but the world's exploded over here, and I got to leave right now. So give me the essence of it. Give me the bottom line. And if you're not prepared to do that, if you haven't practiced that, if you haven't gotten that, you're gonna fall flat and go, well, I thought we had 30 minutes, and I really don't. I can't distill it down. You have to be able to distill that down to its essence.
You're unveiling some things I guess I hadn't even thought about before, but like in that example on Air Force One, he's in the midst of preparing to walk off the plane to give a speech, and I imagine he's dressing in some way, getting paper in front of him and so forth, and you're presenting to him, but he's completely distracted yet engaged at the same time. That's incredibly challenging.
It is. But, again, it's about that connection, and making eye contact and all of the things that are extremely important. When I would prepare for just a regular briefing in the Oval Office, you can't go in there and say, hey, I'm just going to read from a piece of paper. So you've got to practice it and get those, because you want to make eye contact. If you're sitting there reading, guess what? The president's going to reach over and say, I can read this, thanks. Yeah. I don't need you. Yeah. We also had, in those times, we had the opportunity, the briefer had an opportunity to pick some items from the rest of the community that we thought might be of interest. So it wasn't all just the PDB, that we called them briefer selects. And I could pull a piece from DIA or NGA that we had that kind of flexibility to do that. In fact, just as an aside, when I was his briefer, it was early in on his first term, and the PDB staff was still adjusting to President Obama's way of absorbing the PDB and what his objective was for the PDB. You have 8 years of George W. Bush. He had a certain way, and then you have a new customer. You used to have to say, look, the P in PDB means president's. It's his briefing. It's the president's briefing. You just don't go, you just don't go in there and say, well, this is the way we always do it, so you're just going to have to take it.
Right.
No, you adjust. And so President Obama liked to read the briefing ahead of time. So I would go to the residents and deliver it ahead of time. So what does that tell you from the beginning? This is going to be a different kind of exchange. President Bush, George W. Bush would have his briefing. My understanding, and I knew a couple of the briefers that used to brief him, that would kind of be the first time that he would see it. Well, President Obama, we give at least the written part of the briefing to him ahead of time. So he already had a time to absorb it. So if I'm sitting there and telling him what he already read, he's going to say, Jim, I already read that.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
And
what else can you tell me?
That's not what you want to hear from a customer. You're not telling me anything I don't know, because your job is to be value added. And the definition of value added is to provide the customer something that they don't already know. Mm-hmm. So you have to take that into account. So it was about putting more texture around it, the stuff that you just don't get from the written page, maybe a little more information on the sourcing and all of that and how we came about that. And also, as I mentioned, bringing in other items that were not specifically in the PDB, but thought he should be at least aware of that.
So when you walked into the room, were you broadcast mode, or was it like a question and answer kind of? Because he's already read the piece. Like you're saying, you're going to add some color commentary.
Yeah. My experience was go in there, give your pitch, and then the question and answers would come.
Okay.
And then there was another part of the briefing that I was not really appreciative of. I guess you can't be until you really do it. Is the Oval Office dynamic, because the president was not always he was the only person in the Oval Office. You have the National Security Advisor, you have the Chief of Staff, sometimes the Vice President would be in there, and so you have this dynamic that's going on, and you had to be aware also of what those PDB briefers of those principals were providing the customer. And so they would give me, those other PDB briefers would give me what they were providing their customers, because I had to be aware of what they had seen, because they might ask a question. In fact, the first briefing I ever gave the president was not even in the PDB. It was based on a cable that had been given to the National Security Advisor, and when we went through the pre-brief, he thought it was an interesting cable. He asked me about it, said, what's this about? I told him, because my colleague had given me the package of what she had given him, and he said, brief that to the president. I like that. Brief that.
Wow.
So
yes, sir.
Yeah, that was the first briefing. It was, so you have to be prepared for all of that and understand that dynamic, because when you leave the room, they're in there. Or the president might turn to the National Security Advisor and say, hey, I'll make you the National Security Advisor for this example. Brian, what are we doing about this?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Right. That's where the policy discussion is. You're not present for that.
Yeah. Occasionally it might be, you might hear that exchange. But yes, the president, there would be a break, and then you would leave, and then they would have their their session, their policy session.
How did you handle feedback from the president? I mean, it's a very sensitive topic. You're relaying. You probably know more about the president's deliberations around a piece of information very early in an emerging issue. So it's really sensitive information that you have to eventually share with somebody because you want to make the intel better for the next iteration. How did you handle that? How do you communicate that?
Well, we would do a hot wash. We'd go back, and of course they would, up in Langley, they'd want to know, what did the president, first of all, what did he think about the pieces that were in there, and what were the questions that came back? Those would be turned into taskings, and so you had, I think, you had a very robust feedback loop, which I thought was effective.
We didn't always have that either.
Yeah.
It used to be very, very tightly controlled. It was only in the more modern era where we had that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So when your day is done,
yes,
what time are you going home?
Usually about 3:30. So I would get there about midnight, as I said. I would probably leave about 3:30, sometimes 4, be at home at 5, have dinner. My wife would have dinner for me, and then I would go to bed and start over. That's when we were in D.C. When we were on the road, it was just endless. Yeah.
You know what? You had the ride had to end sometime, so you retired out. You took some other jobs after the PDD job, but you got out. So now, as scary as it is to me, you're teaching America's future in national security space, and it seems to be working out because they haven't fired you yet. So,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I keep fooling them. I mean, I do suffer from imposter syndrome at times. Like, my gosh, yeah, you're right. I mean, some people would say, hey, how do you top being the president's briefer? And the answer is, well, you really don't. I mean, it's in a separate category. And so, after that gig, I became a national intelligence manager for Europe and NATO, spent some time, 5 years out at U.S. European Command, the DNI rep and AJ2, assistant director for intelligence, and the DIA rep. So lots of things. And then I finished up. I have to say this. I did finish up my career back at the FBI, this time as the Defense Intelligence Senior Representative to the Bureau. So it was just a bookend, which was a great job.
Yeah.
And once Bureau, always Bureau. So they gave me my start. So to end my career at FBI headquarters where I started, I had a lot greater digs, nicer digs as a senior executive than I did as a file clerk, was great. So, truly blessed. So I always knew at some point, the game's over, they're going to catch you, you gotta move on. I always knew that I wanted to give back in some way because I was so fortunate. And what better way than to give back to your alma mater? So, I knew some folks over at George Mason, and they said, yeah, we'd love for you to teach. And so I actually took over the course that General Hayden had been teaching when he was a distinguished visiting professor there. And I've kind of made it my own at this point, but, I owe it to General Hayden. He gave me the bare bones for me, at least the start of his course and to take over that course. It's extremely rewarding, and as you said, it's about growing the next generation. That's where I am now. I've done some consulting work, and I still do a few little things on the side. But right now, as it comes to, other than trying to be the best grandfather I can possibly be to my granddaughters, that is what I'm focused on. How do we grow the next generation of confident and grounded and, ethically grounded as well. We talked about, as I mentioned, about the integrity part of it, which is extremely important. How do we do that? Because they're our country's future. And so it's hard for them to navigate the whole deal. They need help. They want help. And they're so sharp. I tell them all the time that I'm sure glad I don't have to compete with them. There's no way in this day and age that I could get hired. They're just too smart. They're just so sharp, and they're so dedicated. And it renews my faith in the future of our country. So
That's always a good thing to see. Absolutely.
it truly is, yeah.
They're also navigating a political space that's a lot harder now. It's so much harder.
Yeah.
So whatever you can do to encourage them to continue with the business is important.
Well, I think it's an opportunity to go back to what the basics are of what an intelligence officer's mission is. It's to provide that objective intelligence. Yeah, it might make it a little more difficult, but the mission remains the same. And if you allow yourself to get whipsawed, then you're just not going to survive. You just got to remain steadfast and say, okay, this is our role. It doesn't matter who's, the mission remains the same, and it's about our national security and keeping us safe. And so how do you do that? Just persevere. Even in good times, it's tough to break into the intelligence community because it's so competitive. And, they say, hey, we'll call you back. And then maybe you have to wait a year or 2 years. And by that time, you're going I got to put bread on the table.
Yeah.
Mom and Dad have kicked me out of the house. I can't be living in Mom's basement here while I'm trying to find a job. So, but you got to persevere. And in its own maybe perverse way, that really separates the wheat from the chaff, in a sense. Here are the folks that really want to do it. They're committed to do it. They're willing to go through what it takes. And hopefully, at the end of that process, we have the best. We have the best that, are doing it for the right reasons. They're not doing it for a quick buck. They're not doing it because, it's cool and I can get, because again, as we said, you can't tell people what you're doing.
Right.
But it is a community also, and we all know it's. I'm talking about those of us who have served. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm here is because you're a great guy, Brian, and
it's interesting because that's the reason you're here.
And you're not paying me. You're certainly not paying me anything for this. So we remain close. And very quickly, because I know time is running out here. So, going back to the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, where I'm a board member, and those of you go to afio.org, afio.org. We have an academic outreach program. They asked me to be the chair of that program, and so we're developing a very robust, I think, very aggressive engagement program where we're going to go out to select universities and engage students to help them along those ways. I call it Formers for Futures. These are former intelligence officers who are trying to develop future intelligence officers. So Formers for Futures. And if you're interested in participating in that, if you're a former intelligence officer or if you're a member of AFIO, we could certainly use your help. So in terms of mentorship, so AFIO has a great body of literature that's out there. They publish the Intelligencer. They publish the weekly intelligence notes. They have their AFIO Now interviews. If you go onto YouTube, just type in AFIO Now. So we've got the literature. We've got a guest speaker bureau that we're re-energizing. These are, think about it, Brian, guys like you. We've got within our membership centuries.
It's very subtle.
centuries of intelligence experience on all aspects of the intelligence business, just within our membership.
Yeah, that's true.
So we got the guest speaker bureau, the mentorship program I'm talking about, and we offer scholarships too.
Oh, nice.
So, and then lastly, on my own, I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for quite some time. I call it Spy Scholars, and that is getting former intelligence officers who are now teaching at universities, whether it's full-time or adjuncts, because I'm an adjunct professor, to help students navigate, do the same things that we're talking about, be a mentor, also help each other as professors, help each other be better professors by sharing, our best practices, sharing our mentorship duties. Let's say I get a student who's interested in being a certain, a case officer or whatever, and I go, well, I was not a case officer, I was an intelligence analyst, but I do know somebody who was and is willing to be a mentor for you. And so do those sorts of things as well. So it keeps me out of trouble. It prevents my wife from saying, get off the couch, you lazy, you know what, and do something.
For the record, Vicky is a saint. Totally.
She is a saint.
100%.
And I'll go back to I wouldn't even be in the business if it wasn't for her, being my greatest supporter, as well as my kids and family.
There you go. Well, Jim, thanks again for making time for us. This has been really, really enlightening, and it's been really great to catch up.
Thanks. And so I'll just wait for the check to come into the mail?
That's right. It's going right in the mail. Don't worry about it. In the mail.
Okay, Brian. Thanks.
I'm Lindy Kaiser.
And I'm Brian Drake.
And this has been the Unredacted Podcast.